Welcome everyone to the 7th webinar in our webinar series on integrating with ArchivesSpace. Each webinar in this series will highlight an integration with another application used in archives that ArchivesSpace members have worked on or requested. This webinar will explore current work being done by the ArchivesSpace community to integrate ArchivesSpace with cloud-based library services platform Alma. In this webinar, Kevin Clair, Digital Collections Librarian at Penn State University Libraries, will discuss the ArchivesSpace Alma Integration Plugin he developed during his time at University of Denver. In his current position at Penn State University Libraries, Kevin is the product owner for the Cultural Heritage Digital Repository, gathering functional requirements from end users and developing strategies with collection managers to ensure the repository is meeting the needs of faculty, students, and researchers. Prior to this, he was the ArchivesSpace product owner at the University of Denver, where he did similar things with different types of content. In both roles, he worked to facilitate moving data between library and archival management applications, to reduce the pain and suffering of technical services workers and improve the user experience for researchers. Adrian Hilton, head of the manuscript section at Harvard University's Houghton Library, will discuss current workflows at Harvard for managing data in both Alma and ArchivesSpace and what she needs from an integration. Adrian will outline the preliminary work she's done to gather use cases from other repositories. She hopes to build community support for future Alma and ArchivesSpace development work. In her position at Harvard, Adrian oversees archives processing and manuscript cataloging. Prior to coming to Houghton, Adrian held positions at Columbia University's Rare Book and Manuscript Library and New York University's Camomint Library. Adrian is an advisory member of SAA's Technical Subcommittee on Describing Archives, a Content Standard. We will hold all questions until the Q&A session at the end. If you type a question into the chat, it will be read and answered during the Q&A. You will notice your microphone and camera were both muted when you entered. We ask that you keep your microphone muted and your camera off until the Q&A session at the end. With that, I'll welcome Kevin and Adrian. And Kevin, if you'd like to start us off.
Hi, thank you, Jessica, and hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to the talks this afternoon. I will be, as Jessica said, I'm at Penn State now. I'll be talking about work that I did to integrate ArchivesSpace and Alma in my previous role as Digital Collections Librarian at the University of Denver. The background on this plugin, it was developed at DU. It was part of a larger effort that we had to integrate our description work in special collections and our technical services work across all of the systems that we implemented in our technology stack at the library. That includes ArchivesSpace, our collections database, integrating our collections into our discovery layer, which in addition to Alma, we use Ex Libris Primo for that. So integrating our bibliographic records into Alma from ArchivesSpace and our item level records for the products of our digitization program into our home built open source digital repository. So we needed a way to integrate our archival description work into our bibliographic library metadata management system so that our processing archivists and technical services archivists weren't entering the same metadata in two different systems every time we created a new collection or updated the description of an existing collection, just streamlining what our workflows look like. There will be a link to the plugin at the end of the presentation as well, but the link to the code is available on this slide. And if somebody doesn't mind dropping that into the chat, that would be great as well. If anyone on the webinar is not familiar with Alma and its data model, I have a couple slides here to talk about it. In the context of bibliographic description, Alma has sort of a three-tiered model for how it handles bibliographic resources and the actual items associated with those bibliographic resources. Bibliographic cataloging is built around MARC. It's in the plugin, it's analogous to the ArchivesSpace resource or collection, the top level object of that archival description is done around. Below that, each bibliographic resource can have one or more holdings. That maps roughly to a location, as we'll see when we get to the holdings section. Holdings are sort of two-part in Alma. They have a building code and then within that building a location code. So we have to do a little bit of massaging of the location level metadata to get it to map cleanly to holdings. But in general, the holdings on a bibliographic record map to the location where an item is stored. And then within holdings, you can have, within one holding, you can have one or more items. Those map to top containers in ArchivesSpace. We were attempting to get to the point in ArchivesSpace where we had each top container had its own barcode, each item in Alma had its own barcode, and we would be able to align those things directly so that we could eventually be able to completely integrate managing items in Alma with managing top containers in ArchivesSpace so that one barcoded item would have one record in both systems. This is a diagram of what the Alma Bibliographic API looks like. Within each one, there's a link there at the bottom if you want to read more about how it's implemented. Essentially, each facet of bibliographic description has its own set of API calls. So there's calls for fetching bibliographic metadata in the MARC format, for pushing out new records, for posting updates to existing records. There's similar API calls for holdings, which are also encoded in MARC within Alma. And then at the item level, it's a JSON object rather than something encoded in MARC XML. Each one of those things has an API call. That's how ArchivesSpace and Alma talk to each other within the plugin, is through mostly Alma API calls. There's one or two that are built in from ArchivesSpace. How the plugin works is there's a few things if you want to implement it in development or production in your own shop. There's a couple of things that you'll need to do before you get started. Everything is done through the Alma API, so you'll need to know your API URL and your institution-specific API key to access it. Those things are set up as ArchivesSpace configurations that you would put in your config.rb file. There's documentation about how to do that in the README on the GitHub repository. Both the Alma API URL and the key itself are separate configurations that you'll need to set so that ArchivesSpace knows how to talk to Alma. Recently, I have set it up so that everything on the Alma API goes through the MMS ID, which, if you're unfamiliar with it, the MMS ID is Alma's specific identifier that it uses for bibliographic records. All of the API calls for bibs and holdings and items run through that MMS ID. The Alma API will look for holdings associated with a bib record and items associated with a holding on a bib record. So you'll need to have that somewhere in your ArchivesSpace records so that ArchivesSpace knows which Alma record corresponds to an ArchivesSpace resource. In the controller for Alma integrations, in the front end, there's a setting where you can tell ArchivesSpace which user-defined string is the place where your MMS ID was stored. That's a relatively recent development. It used to be hard-coded. We used string 2, so it was hard-coded that it had to be string 2. It shouldn't care about that, so now it's in the controller instead. And once those things are set up and you have the plugin configured and ready to run, you restart ArchivesSpace, you can call on one of 3 different data model APIs from there in a drop-down list. So you can, for a collection, run queries against either the Bibs API, the Holdings API, or the Items API. I'll run through each of those in turn in the next few slides. When you have the plugin set up in the staff interface and you navigate to it, it'll be whatever your ArchivesSpace staff interface URL is, /plugins/Alma_integrations. From there, you can search. There's 2 things to search for. One is the specific resource for which you want to run integrations and do queries against Alma. And then the second drop-down list is where you tell the plugin which of the 3 types of API calls you want to run. I'll first talk about Bib integrations. When you select a collection and select Bibs in the drop-down list, it will first query the ArchivesSpace API to get the MARC record for that resource. If it finds an MMS ID in the field where you tell it that the MMS ID is, it will search for the MARC record in Alma. If it finds it, there's a few metadata fields where it'll pull that metadata from Alma and integrate it into ArchivesSpace. Right now, it only does it in the 008, the first 6 characters of the 008 control field are the date on file, which is the date that the record was initially filed in the catalog. We don't want to replace that. We want to take whatever is in Alma for that. So what it will do is if it finds a record, it'll take those 6 characters, put them in the ArchivesSpace mark records 008 field. And then after all of that is finished, the plugin will return a display of kind of the new reconfigured mark record that it generated from the ArchivesSpace API and then inserted metadata from Alma. At that point, you have the option to push the new record back out to Alma with any changes that exist from ArchivesSpace. This is what that looks like. This is just a partial view of the University of Denver commencement records record that I showed before. The little dialog box at the top will tell you if it was found in ArchivesSpace, if it was found in Alma, or if it wasn't found in Alma, it'll tell you why it couldn't find it, either because there is no MMS ID on file in ArchivesSpace, or because the MMS ID doesn't correspond to any record in Alma. And then below that is the record. This will mostly be metadata from ArchivesSpace. The only metadata from Alma that the plugin is aware of and can put into this record is those first 6 characters in the 008 that I mentioned, so that it's not constantly replacing that date on file in the database every time you run the plugin. As I mentioned, the main thing that the plugin does not do is bring that metadata in from Alma. Right now it's push only. You can only send, it assumes that ArchivesSpace is your database of record for archival collections. So if there's metadata that you have in Alma that you want to bring in from ArchivesSpace, you still need to do that manually. There's some metadata mapping that would need to be done within the plugin or outside of the plugin that the plugin is somehow aware of, so that you know where Alma metadata should map to within the ArchivesSpace data model. And I just haven't done that. So like I said, push only, right? Push only for now. The holdings integrations will search for existing holdings associated with the collection. This allows a user to very quickly create new holdings records. And again, there's a third configuration that you would need to set to make this work in your config.rb file. A note on how we've implemented holdings, and this is something I'll talk a little bit more about at the end, but at Denver, we only really populate the 852 field in the holdings mark records with metadata. Within that, our subfield B is our building code, which is the physical facility where something lives. And the subfield C is the location code, which is within a building, the specific shelving location. So we have 2 buildings at Denver. H is the Hamden Center, which is our offsite storage. P is for Penrose. Penrose collection is the collection that lives in the main library building on campus. And within the building, we have 4 separate physical holdings locations that have codes, and those are mapped within ArchivesSpace to specific shelving locations. So that's how we have it configured in. Essentially, this configuration is an array of arrays, where the first element of each holding is an array with 2 elements, the first being the building code, the second being the location code. So you'll kind of have to know how your 852 fields look in your holdings to set this up correctly. So this is how this looks in practice. What this is doing is looking for all of the holdings that are associated with a bibliographic MMS ID. In the context of U138, there's just one. Everything is all off-site, so it'll tell you that that exists. It doesn't tell you what items are there. It just tells you that there are holdings. This holding is associated with that bib record. The option to add new holdings, what it will do is it'll run through that holdings configuration setting, filter out all of the ones that already have holdings records, and leaves you with these 4 if you want to add a new holdings record quickly. And what it'll do is there's some metadata that gets inserted in the back end, but your new 852 field will be based on one of these 4 location codes that are remaining from the list. This is my only slide of Ruby code. This is how it builds holdings records. So the control field is fixed. The leader is fixed. The 852 is the only thing that's kind of dynamic, and that's based on those buildings and location codes that are set in your configurations. And then our subfield H is just our local call number. That's one of the things that's left in the plugin that's hard coded based on DU's cataloging setup. So that's something that you might need. I would like to have some feedback from other people who have used this or have tested it to kind of see how we can make it more amenable to setting up in different environments. The last integration is items in top containers. What this will do is it'll search for items associated with the collection. The Alma API has the option to search for all items associated with a bibliographic record, agnostic as to holdings. So that's what this integration does. It just searches all holdings with a bib for the items associated with that bib. Where it can, it will try and pair a little bit of top container metadata from ArchivesSpace with the item level metadata in Alma. That's hooked on the barcode. So if an item record in Alma shares a barcode with a top container record in ArchivesSpace, that row in the table that you'll see in a minute will display metadata from both systems. We've been using this a little bit at DU, or we have been using this at DU to remediate metadata a little bit. We have a lot of instances where the top container, like the container profile in ArchivesSpace, doesn't match up with the container information that we have in Alma. So we've been kind of comparing to see, generally Alma is the one that's correct. So it's pulling in, like trying to figure out copying the Alma container information over to ArchivesSpace, which has been a lot of manual work, but this has made that cross-checking a lot easier. So this is what this looks like. It's kind of a lot, but what it will show you is the Alma Item ID, the barcode number, the description. These first 5 columns all come from Alma, and then the last 2 are from ArchivesSpace. But you can see the Alma profile and the ArchivesSpace profile. You can see it side by side, so you can start to see if the container profiles in each system sort of match each other and what needs to be updated. This is a search-only plugin right now, so there's no, unlike the other 2, there's no way to manipulate the Alma database based on the result of this integration. This is really just sort of informational. It allows us to do that cross-checking and remediation work, but we can't really do a lot of work directly in Alma using it. My dream for this plugin would be for it to integrate with Alma's circulation APIs so that you could potentially make a request for a box in Alma or place it on work order in Alma directly from ArchivesSpace, so that we could almost completely eliminate the need to have to use both systems. Because there's calls to Alma that come directly from the archival management system. Kind of far away from that, but it doesn't do that yet. But that's like, when that's done, I would pretty much call this plugin finished, as much as anything is finished. So that kind of brings us to the present day. Where I'm at now, I'm interested in getting a little bit more community buy-in from people who are interested in integrating ArchivesSpace with Alma. Right now, it's very much focused on DU's specific implementation of Alma and ArchivesSpace. So there's areas where I think it could grow and be made more usable by a larger community. I am no longer at DU, which on the ArchivesSpace testing side of things is not a huge holdup, but Penn State isn't an Ex Libris shop, so I don't have access to the Alma sandbox anymore. So I can write code, but I can't test it against the working Alma instance. So that's something where I could really use some assistance from the community as far as testing help or identifying problems or potential enhancements to the plugin. If you have anything like that, I've recently opened it up to submitting issues. So you can submit issues, bugs, or areas of future enhancement that the community could work on. I'm also interested in any code contributions or pull requests from people who test this against their sandbox or development setup, just to kind of move it forward a little bit more now that I have fewer resources to devote to maintaining it. I just want to acknowledge at the end the help that I've received from Special Collections and Archives and Digital Collection Services, my former department, and Library Technology Services at the University of Denver for the time that I was allowed to work on this plugin and test it out with archivists and tech folks there and maintaining it. And the University of Amsterdam has been really helpful over the last few weeks and months in trying it out in their setup and identifying some of the issues where I've been able to unhard code a lot of the DU specific implementations and configurations, especially around holdings records and things like that, to try and make it more of a community product and less of a DU specific product. If you helped me out and I left you out, it's probably because it's in my DU Outlook, which I can't get to anymore, so I apologize. That's everything I have to talk about. My email address is here. There's another link there to the Alma Integrations plugin code and the repository and the issues. That's all of my remarks. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Adrian now.
Okay, so thanks, Jessica, for organizing this webinar, particularly under these trying and scary circumstances. I really like Kevin's plugin and the functionality it offers, and I'm hoping what I present today will eventually build on all that great work. A little bit about myself, in addition to the bio that Jessica mentioned. I manage a group of archivists at Houghton Library. I also create a lot of description myself, both in ArchivesSpace and Alma. I'm the co-chair of a working group that manages a multi-repository instance of ArchivesSpace at Harvard. And I was the previous co-chair of the SAA's TS DAX. Currently, I'm an advisory member. What I'm going to cover today is a use case that I'm working with is that the archivist needs to maintain data in both ArchivesSpace and Alma for a variety of reasons, and needs the ability to easily push data between the two. I know members of the community were interested in an ArchivesSpace to Primo integration, as well as something that works with connection. This product doesn't address those use cases, nor does it go into bringing data from Alma back into ArchivesSpace, though like Kevin mentioned, that could certainly be added. I'm going to present an extended scenario that is fairly common at my repository, walking us through each step. And when a feature enhancement of the integration between the two systems could help the work of the archivist, I will outline that. I have a more extensive specification that I will share a link to in the comments after my presentation. And there are a few more features in that and there are also longer explanations for the features that I'm going to briefly discuss today. I won't be presenting a fully formed product. What I have is merely theoretical, but both Jessica and Christine assured me that this was fine and that part of integration is all of this preliminary work. Ideally, though, this lays out some of the groundwork for moving development forward. And it's generally better to have something to comment on rather than starting from scratch. So, what the goals for me of a successful integration between ArchivesSpace and Alma, I'd like to establish ArchivesSpace as the system of record for certain types of data and the ability to push data from there to the Alma records where it makes sense. So whether that's Bib, holdings, or item records. And ultimately, this reduces the double data entry that we're currently doing and minimizes human error and the overhead that it takes to maintain two systems. I'm a big believer in standards, so I want the data mapping between the two systems to be standards compliant, But I know within that, there's a lot of variety. And so I would hope that the plugin could be configurable to local needs. And building on that, this specification accommodates my own specific workflows at Houghton, but I'm hoping that it's generalizable enough to be useful for a larger community of users. So a little bit about my local conditions in order to ground where I'm coming from. We provide access to all materials upon accessioning, and we do this as quickly as possible. We create an accession record in ArchivesSpace, and then we create a publicly discoverable resource record and catalog record. And users can find our description either through our catalog or through our Finding Aids portal. In terms of ArchivesSpace at Harvard, like I said, we're a multi-repository instance. Harvard itself is very decentralized, and so there's a lot of variation in practice just at Harvard among the repositories. We are locally hosted, and up until very recently, we've had very little interaction with the database through the API, and we don't have server-side access. The archivist, I should say. In terms of Houghton and Alma, we're required to use our ILS for our payments and invoicing. And so this means that a lot of our record keeping must involve Alma. And then in terms of inventory control, we have a mix of item records in Alma and top containers in ArchivesSpace. So here's the scenario, and I'm hoping a lot of you can relate to this. So a curator buys some things and then buys some more. We want to gain intellectual and physical control efficiently so that we can provide access and discovery through our catalog and through our Finding Aids platform shortly after acquisition. So let's begin. Curator X buys the personal papers of a very important person. X gives our accessioning archivist a heads up that this collection has arrived and the invoice needs to be paid. Our accessioning archivist creates a quick and dirty accession record, one that includes the DAX requirements for single level minimum record or thereabouts, most of which we already got from the curator. So we have our title, our creator, the identifier, which in this case is the accession number, extent, the language of the materials, the conditions governing access, where the material came from, the immediate source of acquisition, a brief scope and content note. And then because our billing is handled through Alma, the accessioning archivist clicks a button in the accession record that's marked Create New Alma Record. And this takes me to my first feature. So create a new Alma record based on data in the ArchivesSpace accession record. So by selecting Create New Alma Record, the archivist initiates an API call to search Alma. The Alma database is searched for the accession identifier or accession number. And again, this field may be different for folks where they put it in Alma, so I would want this to be locally configurable. And if no accession identifier exists in Alma, a screen will ask the archivist if they want to create new Alma records. An archivist will have the ability to choose yes or no. If yes is selected, an API call is initiated to create new bibliographic and holdings records in Alma, mapping data from the ArchivesSpace accession record to the correct fields in the Alma records. And again, the mapping should be configurable. So our new bibliographic record is created, which generates that MMS ID or the unique identifier of the bibliographic record. And that bibliographic identifier is going to be used to create the links between Alma and ArchivesSpace. And this takes me to another feature. I want to put that bibliographic ID back into my ArchivesSpace accession record. So Alma will post the MMS ID to a new field in the accession record. And this is great. Now we have a bibliographic record, our acquisition team can pay the bill, we have that record that's linked to our accession record, and everything can move on. So I want to briefly talk a little bit about what my theoretical relationship between the bibliographic record is with the records in ArchivesSpace. So the bibliographic record, like I said, has a unique ID, that's the MMS ID. The MMS ID has a one-to-many relationship with records in ArchivesSpace. An MMS ID may be associated to one or many accession records, similar to how a resource record may be linked to one or many accession records. This functionality assumes that a resource record has a one-to-one relationship with a bibliographic record. And so any sort of future development would ensure that the MMS ID is unique to that resource record type. The integration between the Alma record and its corresponding ArchivesSpace records will be possible by introducing 2 new fields into the ArchivesSpace database. So like Kevin was talking about, they're using string 2 to put their MMS ID. What I'm proposing is that we have new fields put into the database in the accession record table and the resource record table for MMS ID. And that those fields will be used to create the links between the 2 systems. Okay, since we provide access to our collections right away, we want to do a little bit of minimal processing. So our accessioning archivist spawns the accession record into a resource record, which moves the MMS ID with the data. They do a bit of minimal processing, identifying some obvious series, and provide a bit more descriptive detail that will allow a user to identify more closely a box or 2 that they may want. Our archivist updates the spawned resource record. Maybe they change the extent, add a new creator, fill out the scope and content note a bit, add a bulk date. They want the corresponding data in Alma records to reflect these changes, which takes me to my next feature. Update Alma records with data from the resource record. So our archivist wants to manually initiate an overlay of the existing bibliographic record with the newly edited description in the resource record. Perhaps again, there's a button on the top menu of the resource record for Create New Alma Record and one for Update Existing Alma Records. Our archivist selects the latter and an API call is initiated to update the Alma records based on changes in the resource record. And again, the mapping would be configurable. So this is really great. My bibliographic record is almost an exact replica of my resource record, but without the risk of human error and all the double data entry work. Now going down the road about 6 months, our curator X discovers another cache of material from our very important person. X lets us know that this cache arrived and gives us some information about it. This cache of material has unique characteristics. Aside from it coming in physically separate from the rest of the material, it has different access restrictions. We want to track this information and document it with its own accessioning documentation. Our accessioning archivist creates a new accession record and another unique accession ID. I know it's been in the interest of the community for a while now, but instead of opening my resource record and adding this accession information manually there, perhaps a series level description, I'd like to just push it over, creating a new component, which brings me to this feature here. Insert accession information as a component in a resource record. So when the archivist spawns the accession record, a screen might ask if they want to create a new resource record or an archival object. If archival object is selected, the archivist will select the resource to link and the level. Maybe in this case, they choose series. And then they click spawn. So then this establishes a link between the accession record, the resource record, and the bibliographic record with that MMS ID that was in the resource record. When the link is established, we will have the opportunity to update our Alma records with information from the accession record, which brings me to another feature. Add a new field to Alma given description and accession record in ArchivesSpace. So in my case, this would mean adding a new 541 field. And so once that link is established between the accession record and the resource record, an API call is initiated using the MMS ID of the attached resource record to create new fields in Alma based on the description in the accession record. And of course, we can't have everything. So I need to go up and manually adjust my collection level resource information to account for this new accession. Maybe I need to update my extent, change the scope and content note a bit, and add the new restriction statement for this cache of material. But guess what? It's 5 o'clock. I need to pick up my daughter from aftercare, and I'm already late. So I update my resource record, I click save, and this takes me to another feature. I want to update my Alma records when corresponding resource records are edited and saved. So rather than a manual initiation, I would like this to happen perhaps nightly, weekly, so that even if I forget to update my Alma record with this new information, the system did it for me. And once again, my bibliographic record matches my resource record, and my accession information is intact and integrated. So now I can just kick back with all the extra time I have on my hands from not doing all that double data entry. This is a brief illustration of the process, and I apologize for its inelegance, but you can kind of see here that at the top, I think I can use my pointer. At the top, the curator is buying the personal materials. The archivist is creating the accession record in ArchivesSpace, which is then going to initiate the plugin to create my Alma, Bib, and Holdings records. My archivist is going to spawn the accession record into a resource record down here. And when that gets updated, it's going to initiate the plugin to update the Bib and Holdings records here. And then again, we have our second cache of material and our second accession record, which is going to get plugged in right in here to my resource record with this new feature to spawn as an archival component. And that's going to again initiate the plugin to update my records in Alma. So in terms of next steps, I would really love it if folks could comment on the specification that I've come up with. And I've never done a specification before, so any sort of critical, thoughtful feedback is welcome. Again, I'll share the link with the participants. And if you are really interested in doing the work to help me further develop the specification, please do email me. I'm looking to put together a small team of folks to help develop this further. And I particularly need help on the integration between top containers and item records, fully developing the functional requirements, and then the specifics of the data mapping. And then there's my email. And with that, I will turn it over to Jessica and questions.
All right. Thank you, Adrian. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay. All right. And Kevin and Adrian, if you can't see my screen, please chime in and let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to go ahead and get going. Adrian, I think a lot of people in attendance can identify with the workflow and the pressure points integrating those two systems that you pointed out, so I really appreciate it. And Kevin, thank you for exploring the plugin, and I know that I was personally very excited to hear you call it basically done, so that's pretty cool. But before we move into the Q&A, I'm going to briefly present some remarks prepared by our current leader of the ArchivesSpace Technical Advisory Council's integration subteam, Dallas Pillin. Unfortunately, Dallas wasn't able to attend the webinar today, but he did draft up these comments to add to the conversation. The ArchivesSpace Technical Advisory Council's integration subteam supports the ArchivesSpace community by documenting the integration of systems with the ArchivesSpace application. This includes tracking current integrations, creating resources that assist the community with their integration work, and engaging with the ArchivesSpace community. The integration subteam answers questions, leads discussions, and assists with the development of integrations. They do this by facilitating conversations, assisting with scoping and requirements, and liaisoning between developers, the ArchivesSpace program team, and the ArchivesSpace community. In 2019, the integration subteam conducted a survey of the ArchivesSpace community asking about the most desired system integrations with ArchivesSpace. A report on the results of that survey is forthcoming, but Alma was easily the most desired system integration, with 30 out of 87 respondents expressing an interest in ArchivesSpace and Alma integration. The survey also asked for respondents to share desired workflows and use cases for system integrations, which can help inform future development. The integration subteam survey respondents would like for Alma and ArchivesSpace integration to allow for bidirectional data transfer between the two systems. Most respondents would like to create catalog records in Alma from ArchivesSpace resource records. Some would like to create ArchivesSpace resource records from Alma catalog records, and others noted that updates should be reflected in the appropriate system regardless of the system performing the creation or change. In addition to creating catalog records from resource-level ArchivesSpace description, many respondents also indicated a desire to pull ArchivesSpace box lists, presumably top container and location information, into Alma from ArchivesSpace to allow for items to be requested by users from Alma. Multiple respondents noted the importance of access points, i.e. ArchivesSpace subjects and agents, being synced between the two systems. And yet another respondent specifically mentioned a use case of pushing digital object records to Alma from ArchivesSpace. These responses overall point to the fact that the users would like collection-level descriptive metadata, controlled access points, and instance records from ArchivesSpace to be synced to Alma as part of any integration work. Multiple respondents also said that they would like for any integration to require minimal cleanup or editing of records in either system to be able to sync the metadata records between both systems. Yes, absolutely. With some voicing support for a configurable data mapping profile in ArchivesSpace to support the syncing of metadata between the two systems in a way that can be easily implemented in different institutional contexts. The survey also revealed that there is a substantial portion of the ArchivesSpace user community that is willing to devote time, resources, or information towards making integrations happen. 35 out of the 87 respondents indicated that they and/or their institution is interested in working to develop an integration. Maybe some in attendance are some of those 35. The integration subteam looks forward to making the full survey report available soon to continue to add to community resources about developing integrations, and is available and willing to chat with those interested in developing integrations and about how to get started. So thanks to Dallas for preparing those remarks. And we all look forward to hearing the full report later this year. So again, I'll thank Adrian and Kevin for being here today and moving this conversation forward. If you do have a desired workflow or use case that you'd like to share, please do so now, or maybe if you're willing to offer help with testing or contributing to Kevin's plugin, please let him know or say so now. We'll go ahead and open up the floor to questions and comments. If you'd like to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself now or type your comment into the chat. I will read any messages coming through in the chat, and I will have to unmute you, so I will be doing that right now. All right. We are getting some questions in the chat. Someone is asking, will the webinar be archived or shared? As for reference, yes, this is being recorded and it will be made available on our YouTube channel. Question for Kevin, hold requests. I think Fred may still be typing. For Adrian, how do Alma order records factor into your workflow?
So I'm assuming this means the invoicing information that that gets attached to the bib or item records. I haven't thought about that, like the back end too much, and the way that my shop is set up, that whole workflow is handled by a separate department. So I'm not sure if that's what you're speaking to. I haven't thought about it that much.
All right. Seth says, thank you everyone for setting this up and for all the information. I will have some questions, but we'll need to email them later. I need to process a bit before asking a few questions. We totally understand, Seth. Weatherly, for Kevin, and sorry if I missed this, where does the location information populated in the holdings record come from? The ASpace top container location record? Could the plugin be configured to add this information to the item records instead?
So it comes from, yeah, so if you were, so when you're creating a holdings record, it just comes from the drop-down list. So there's a little bit of like, you have to know like it doesn't really, it's that part of it isn't really tied into Alma at all. You kind of have to know where the materials are going to go before you put them there, if that makes sense. I think it could be configured to add that information to the item records. I honestly, it's been a while since I've really had to dig into that part of the plugin code. So I know it is set up somehow in the back end to where like the building codes in ArchivesSpace are aligned with the building codes in Alma. But I don't remember exactly where in the plugin we have it set up to where like anything with a Hamden Center location code would get that H building code and HSCOL holding code. I'd have to look into that a little bit more, and I would probably, and before I did anything more with the item plugin or with the item integrations, I would do that.
Okay, thanks. Again, I think this question is for Kevin. Is the limitation for hold requests due to lack of desired user ID and or item barcode in ArchivesSpace, or another functional hurdle due to multiple API calls?
So holds and work orders are a different API from the Bib API. The circulation API is like it's a completely different set of calls. So that's the main, that's in addition to all the stuff I said about how the item integrations only search ArchivesSpace, right? Or only search Alma right now. The other thing is that if you wanted to do that, you would have to, like, it's not, that's beyond the Bib's API. You're into the circ API at that point. Some of it is just, I don't know if it behaves differently or how it behaves differently. So a lot of it is technical.
Okay, thanks. Sarah's asked a question about, is the plugin something that could be added to a Lyrasis hosted Lone Arranger repository? And Christine's answered that in the chat, so I'm just going to read it. I don't believe anyone from the hosting team is here. You'd want to reach out to them and they can tell you what's possible. And Tara, sorry. Tara says she's writing comments as Seth, but because her son is Zooming on another computer for school and it's showing up as Seth. Sorry, Tara. Weatherly says, that's great to know about the building codes. Thanks. Julian, I apologize for going too fast in my presentation. If you want me to repeat anything, I'm happy to do it. All right, Fred, I think, Kevin, this is more follow-up. The circ API should otherwise behave similarly to the Bib APIs, but as you surmised, you'd have to stack calls to get the item PID based on a barcode and then craft, I don't know, a post or put with the needed XML or JSON.
Yeah, so yeah, that's kind of what I figured. And it's that, and then just because the item integrations are so unfinished, I hadn't gotten to that part yet.
Right, and if anyone would find it easier to unmute themselves now to ask questions instead of typing into the chat, please feel free. You should be able to. Is the circulation API connected to the Alma booking/reading room feature?
We don't use that, so I don't know. Yeah, everything we do is through work orders. We haven't done anything with reading room at DU. So it could be, but I'm not sure.
Fred says was looking for that as well. I don't see a booking related API call at present. We'll go ahead and give it another minute in the chat. So if you are typing questions right now, please get those in and we'll answer them. Here's another. Kevin, why did you not implement the item records? Was it a time issue or was there a technical issue?
I left DU for Penn State. Yeah, it was so time issue. Yeah.
So yeah, if anyone is willing to help Kevin in this work and to continue this work, please email him at the address provided.
Oh, can I just answer this? Elizabeth asked how hard it would be to do. I think it probably depends. It'd be harder than the other two because the way that, so with bibs and holdings, it's mark records. So those were relatively easy because ArchivesSpace creates mark records and I just, the plugin just takes whatever ArchivesSpace gives it. And holdings, it's one field in a mark record at this point. So items would be a little bit trickier because you have to, there's a mapping that's going to have to happen to align the top container records with the JSON schema for all items in Alma. So that part is harder. Like there's metadata mapping that has to get done before you can start to write the code. I think that's just a matter of sitting down. That might be something where community engagement would be good, because I don't know. That's like Denver, the way Denver implements Alma may not match up with the way other people implement Alma. So it'd be good to get some people down in a group to talk about what that might look like. Part of the quick answer is because I left DU, but the real answer is that it's just like, there's a lot more like thinking work that needs to get done. There's like stuff you got to do before you write the code. Yeah.
Well, Kevin, do you see Elizabeth said, good to know, happy to help with that metadata map.
Yeah, nice. I will follow up.
All right, everyone, we aren't getting any other questions in the chat. So I'll go ahead and say that this has been recorded like was previously asked about, and that will be made available on our YouTube channel. I'll also make sure the chat log is saved so that if there was a particular question or resource that got dropped into the chat you'd like to follow up on, the chat log will be available too. Otherwise, thank you everyone for coming to this webinar. And as a reminder, our next webinar in the Integrations with ArchivesSpace series will be integrating ArchivesSpace and ArcLight, and that will be on May 12th at 2 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, everybody.